an open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's the 13th of February 2016. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter. And there's a couple of people in the chat I would like to say hi to. Captain, possible suspect, and one unknown. Dan was wondering if the rupture had taken place and where everybody had went. And so yeah, it's a bit slow this morning. I was doing a bit of 9/11 research. There's this woman who wrote a book, Methodical Deceptions, I believe it was. And she's was a flight attendant at that time. I don't know what she's doing at the moment. And she had lots of interesting things to say about a flight attendant's job and protocols and things like that, and how her own investigation in the events of September 11, 2001. And it took a long time for me, if I remember that correct. In my years of doing research, that there was so much information that it took a real long time before you started feeling like, okay, I've heard this before, this is just repetition. And so there were so many bits of data available, of which I knew nothing about the sources, if I could be able to trust the sources. Huh? So yeah, that was an interview that I heard at how many hours in these Peace Revolution podcasts are usually very, very long. This one is 15 hours. I think this must be like, I think it's 15 hours. And if that's true, then this is at like hour 12 or so. So, something to drink. What's up, everybody? How you doing? Let's roll a ciggy. Alrighty, got one here, so I don't have to roll one. That's what got me started off, the whole 9/11 thing. I got some things open here regarding that in Richard's brain, for instance. It's one of the tools that I use. Got a 10-minute clip of Philip Selikov, Philip Zelikov, if you want to hear that. Let's see, let's move this Skype thingy over there. It doesn't bother me there. The thing that I have planned for today is actually Aristotle logic. It's I regard this as one of the most important topics. You know, as I've said many times as a philosopher, that truth is one of the most important things in philosophy, and logic is a tool which you can use to validate your arguments. And it's there's a lot here. There's the organon, the categories, from words into propositions. This is going to be very tough for me since my English isn't that good, especially when it comes to breaking down whole sentences in verbs and adverbs and all that kind of stuff. Even in Dutch I wasn't very good at that. Then, in my 9/11 research, I came across Peter Dale Scott. Now, I don't know what happened, but his website seems to be down, which is peterdalescott.net. Not peterdalescott.com, which he claims is not from him. So, peterdalescott.net. But I haven't been able to see why this website is down. I found other links, by the way, in Richard's tool. You know, it's a very good tool. It's a very good tool. If you click on something, below comes more information. It's kind of like divided into two windows. And the below information may have like videos, for instance. And one of the videos that was linked to the 9/11 debacle, it wasn't there anymore, you know? It's just gone. Poof. Can't find it. And so same here with the peterdalescott.net. It's not working for me. And I tried it with this tool you can find online. Is it down for me only? Or something like that. If you type something like that in, then you will get it as a link in Google. And even they claimed that it was down. So... And then I knew this, but this also came back and refreshed my memory. There's this Dutch demolition expert. I've told you about him before. Danny de Venko, something like that. I don't remember exactly how his last name was pronounced or spelled, for that matter. But Danny came on video as I think it was the BBC, I'm not quite sure. May not have been the BBC, but some media. And was shown the World Trade Center 7 coming down. And he had no idea at that time that World Trade Center had come down. And this is years after 9/11. And he was asked, and he said, well, this is clearly done by set explosives. This is a controlled demolition. And then the person that interviewed him told him that this happened on September 11, 2001. He said, no, that's impossible. So, yeah, that is impossible. That's you know, the first reaction would see that's impossible because you can't believe the lie of Silverstein that, thank you, possible suspect, it's apparently that is the BBC. And you can't believe Silverstein's lie when talking about buildings and using the term pull it, because you can't make a decision at that point, then go around this 47-story high building, place all the explosives and make it come down in the time allotted. It's just not done. It's impossible. Right? So Silverstein is a liar. That building was rigged long before 9/11. So things are still disappearing. I remember that from my research also, which I started around March or something, 2002, maybe a little bit later. It actually started right when I saw it happen, because I am familiar with steel and the strength that it has and the construction metals used. And so I knew that something was up, but I figured that the government would come out and tell me why the buildings had collapsed. So it took me a while before doing my own research, and I found also that when I was trying to share my research, like I would pick up some little fact and present that in a conversation, and they would say, well, where did you get that? And I would say, well, I saw this there and there, and I would go back to this website which I had bookmarked, and poof, it's gone. You know, it reminds me very much of a memory hole of Winston, 1984. So those kind of things do seem to happen. I've also, is that stratrisks.com by Michael Vail? Many people around that listen might have heard of him. Stratrisks.com. Let's see what happens here. Yeah, see, this is also not what I would expect. It says here, buy this domain. Alright, so I don't know what happened to Michael, but this isn't, what I expected. I doubt that Michael can afford this, what is it, $15 per year or so that I paid for just the domain, right? So, a lot of things seem to change and disappear, and that's disturbing, isn't it? Hey, Jane. Jane says, I have heard that some high buildings are built with demolition system for future use. No, that seems absurd. It seems too risky. Yeah. Possible says, has anyone ever asked the architect of the building his input? Yes, if you're talking about, that depends on what building you're talking about. I know about WTC 1 and 2 that the engineer actually came out and mentioned planes, compared planes hitting that building to a pencil hitting your door screen that holds the bugs out. That's the kind of effect that it has on the structural integrity of the building, which I would agree with. Don't know his name, but that's what he said. There's a very good website, Architects and Engineers. No, that I don't know possible of the Building 7. I just know that it was, and I can't confirm this, but that's what I heard, that it was even more structurally sound because it was built over another building. Now, I do know from the education that I had that when the engineers make a drawing, that the drawings come to us and we have to shape the metal in those ways, right? And they tell us that they make these drawings based on twice the strength that they actually need to keep the building standing, right? So there's always, it's twice as strong as that it needs to be, just to keep it standing. They do that because of safety reasons. This seems logical to me. So there is no way it was due to structural failure without the use of explosive or something. Yes, a911truth.org for architects and engineers. All right. This is, I think this is a good one. I'll put this in the chat room just as a side note. You want to do research into words, this is a good tool. You can use all of your English words, translate them into Latin, and see what I'm using here, technology, which turns out to link to artificial, man-made. Artificial is used, the word is used there. I'm not saying that technology actually comes from artificial, but blah blah. There is technologia, which is actually the Latin word where technology comes from. Right, so it's linked to artwork, art, craft, trade, method, trick, skill, talent, craftsmanship. Also comes up. Artificium. Alright, so that's that. Nice little word research tool. Lol, P. Yeah. Well, I'm not about to be censored, P. He says, don't mention Judy Woods and her space weapons, or I will kick the dogs and blame you. Yeah. Yeah. I don't necessarily find it that important on how exactly these buildings were demolished. The only really important thing is that we are able to contradict and falsify the official story. So that would be the main goal here. So, let's see. Clickety click. Nobody wanted to hear about Philip Zelikow. No, we'll skip that. What else did I have open? 9/11. Documentaries, Peter Dale Scott, Richard Cheney, Continuity of Government, COG. It only has like 1,000 views. It's been up since 2011. So, yeah, was wondering what happened to him. There's lots of videos with Peter Dale Scott together, also some of them with Dave Talbot. That's the things that I was looking at today. So, the Aristotle logic, right? Let's put that there. And close it a little bit. So I can have a second window open. Clickety click, doesn't work. Here we go. And back. Philip Zelikow, yeah, somebody mentions him. Alright, it's only 10 minutes. And let me know if the sound is not good.
Philip Zelikow, in his capacity as the staff director for the Kane-Hamilton 9/11 Commission that delivered its report in July of 2004, is a very important figure, and he is one of the key operatives in the cover-up of the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
The guy is clearly an academic, closely related to the Bush administration, close friend of Condoleezza Rice, and he had written about so-called catastrophic terrorism before 9/11. And yeah, he was in the perfect position to see how much hay could be made out of this event, and had already talked about catastrophic terrorism and in a sense knew how it could be used. He was certainly the perfect choice for helping to write the report, because this is a guy that could see how to manipulate it in terms of people's civil liberties and getting a war going and so on. So he's a perfect guy.
Foreign Affairs, the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations, in its November-December 1998 edition, published an article entitled Catastrophic Terrorism, Imagining the Transformative Event. The Pearl Harbor-like event occurred just 3 years later. Philip Zelikow was one of the authors.
If the 1993 bombings of the World Trade Center had succeeded, the resulting horror and chaos would have exceeded our ability to describe it. Such an act of catastrophic terrorism would be a watershed event in American history. It could involve loss of life and property unprecedented in peacetime and undermine America's fundamental sense of security. Like Pearl Harbor, the event would divide our past and future into a before and an after. The United States might respond with draconian measures, scaling back civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, detention of suspects, and use of deadly force. More violence would follow, either future terrorist attacks or U.S. counterattacks. Belatedly, Americans would judge their leaders negligent for not addressing terrorism more urgently.
Philip Zelikow, Catastrophic Terrorism, Imagining the Transformative Event, 1998.
He was certainly the perfect choice for helping to write the report.
Philip Zelikow, who is the head of the 9/11 Commission, has an interesting background. His thesis in college was on creating public myths. And as many of us know, 9/11 was the ultimate public myth.
Contemporary history is defined functionally by those critical people and events that go into forming the public's presumptions about its immediate past, akin to public myth, without the negative implication. Such presumptions are beliefs thought to be true, although not necessarily known to be true with certainty, and shared in common with the relevant political community.
Prior to his appointment to head the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow was the executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group, a Marshall Task Force on National Security, whose members include Cheney, Rice, and Wolfowitz.
My starting point, of course, is that these attacks were not the work of any group of Arab or Muslim fanatics, but were rather a deliberate war provocation orchestrated by the U.S. intelligence community and the security bureaucracy. But let's focus on Zelikow as an individual. When Philip Zelikow was then appointed to be the staff director doing the substantive work of the Kane-Hamilton Commission, he suffered from a crippling conflict of interest because he had such close personal ties to Miss Rice, who, of course, in her capacity as the head of the National Security Council, was one of the main people that he was going to investigate. Governor Kane of New Jersey, former Congressman Lee Hamilton from Indiana, put in ceremonial appearances, did some public speeches on the subject, but the main work was done by a staff that was directed by Philip Zelikow.
I was very excited when we got a 9/11 commission and knew we would get a 9/11 commission report. And I knew that it was going to be a report I disagreed with, just like the Warren Commission and the Warren report about the Kennedy assassination. But it was a whole bunch of new evidence, and we would be able to see more clearly what was sensitive, what they could report accurately, and what they had to lie about. We got that in the case of the report. So it becomes very important to know that the man who really controlled the direction of the investigation of the commission and the man who very much controlled the writing of the report was Philip Zelikow, this was supposed to be a group outside the government, but Zelikow had written a book with Condoleezza Rice. There was no way you could think of him as an outsider.
To confirm his ties then with Condoleezza Rice, when Condoleezza Rice took over the State Department, Zelikow was then able to get a job as one of the top bureaucrats in the State Department during the reign of Miss Rice. NORAD generals, U.S. Air Force generals, committed perjury in front of the commission by falsifying timelines and making mutually contradictory statements, and that Kane and Hamilton were aware that it was perjury. The question then arose what to do. They had a closed-door meeting of the commission staff, the members and certain key staff members. Zelikow was undoubtedly part of this meeting to decide what to do. The big question was, should the Kane-Hamilton Commission forward criminal referrals to the Department of Justice based on the lies that had been told by these NORAD generals? And the decision that came out of that meeting was, no, we do nothing. We'll leave it to the Inspectors General of the Department of Transportation for the FAA and above all of the Pentagon for the Air Force and NORAD generals. So Mr. Zelikow seems to be a party to suborning perjury in front of the commission.
Zelikow focuses on what he calls searing or molding events that take on transcendent importance and therefore retain their power even as the experience generation passes from the scene. Wikipedia.
Philip Zelikow was so experienced at creating public myth, and then he ended up being the head of the 9/11 Commission, which we call the Cover-Up Commission, is rather revealing.
Mr. Zelikow was recruited by the administration to brief us during the transition because he was one of the foremost experts in the world on Al-Qaeda. Karen Hughes.
There's then the Able Danger cover-up. Former Congressman Kurt Weldon of Pennsylvania came forward and talked about Able Danger with the help of Colonel Schaffer and Captain Philpott, DIA officers. They're talking about Atta and other accused patsies being in the United States early in the year 2000. Then we had an absurd comedy of errors. The Able Danger people said that they had informed the Kane-Hamilton Commission in the person of Zelikow in a tent in Afghanistan that this group of patsies had been in the United States much earlier than was otherwise thought. Zelikow received the information personally, covered it up. It never appeared in the final report. When Weldon and the Able Danger people made their accusations in the summer of 2005, the Kane-Hamilton Commission first denied it, then they confirmed it, and then they denied it and said it was not important because it had no historical significance. So there's Zelikow covering up evidence, destroying evidence, and leaving out relevant facts. At one moment in the hearings of the Kane-Hamilton Commission, there's an exchange between Ashcroft, the Attorney General, and Picard, the former acting director of the FBI. Picard says, Ashcroft told me he didn't want to hear about Al-Qaeda, was not interested in terrorism, I should shut up and go away. Ashcroft in the same room says, no, that's a lie, I never said it. Now, one of those two is committing perjury. Zelikow is not interested in discovering what's going on.
As a reward for the job he did with the report, they put him on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, which is a group you don't hear about very much, but is a very key link between what you might call the White House and the ruling establishment of the United States.
He is an example of the kind of invisible government operative who is part of the cover-up that will attempt to make sure that the truth about the 9/11 terrorist attacks is never known, all the while eagerly calling for military action against Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and other Arab and Muslim states. This is exactly the kind of person that needs to be investigated. His actions in suborning perjury, covering up evidence, and making certain vital questions simply disappear from the report have got to be investigated in the most urgent way.
All right. You pasted the link for that audio in the chat room in case you want to check it out. Welcome, Grump. How are you doing, buddy? Let's see. Only Jane and Grump have joined. For Anons, also welcome. All right, so let's pick up what we were gonna do. This is from the table of contents. One of them is laws of thought, for instance. Square of opposition, that one is really hard. Deduction versus induction. Moral reasoning, fallacies even. Okay, so I'm guessing I'll put this in the chat also. In case you want to do that. Hey Dal, how you doing? What's up? Alright. So why, the reason why I think this is important is to avoid total confusion, actually, when talking to people, when listening to people. That word listening to people, the word listening is also sometimes very hard. All right. One is the organon. I think that's translates as tool. Not sure about that. All right, good to hear, Dal. To those used to the silver tones of an accomplished writer like Plato, Aristotle's prose will seem, at first glance, a difficult read. Yeah, we were going into Plato like last few episodes, and I heard this other philosopher speak about the way people are introduced to philosophy, and they don't usually go to Plato, but first to Aristotle, and then later to Plato. So maybe that's what we should do. Welcome back, Possible. What we have are largely notes written in various points in his career for different purposes, edited and cobbled together by later followers. The style of the resulting collection is often rambling, repetitious, obscure, and disjointed. All right. What the heck is that? Jane opens September 13, 1991. LaRouche, Aristotle is the root of the evil we confront today. Do you want me to read that? I have it open. Just let me know if you want to hear that on air. And if you want to be on air, contact me at Skype, Solvinur, Solvinur. Okay. There are many arcane, puzzling, and perhaps contradictory passages. Yeah. I wonder if those contradictory passages are not just two different views. Blah, blah. Clickety-click. This problem is compounded by the abstract, technical vocabulary, logic sometimes required, and by the wide-ranging scope and the scattered nature of Aristotle's observations. Right, so I think I said this last week, just, as a comment on this other figure. I don't remember his name. Who was supposed to have invented logic, a new way of logic, as a more or less adding to Aristotle's logic or making it better or whatever. And I said, well, you know, that's not correct. I said that logic was like inherent to human nature, and when my complaint is that he didn't invent it, it was already there. It's just that there has been a description found for it. It's like how your mind works: grammar, logic, rhetoric. It doesn't come to you that those abilities have always been there, but now we just named them. Grammar, logic, rhetoric. This is how your mind works. Right? So that goes for logic as well. It's something you are born with. And well, you might ask, well, why there are so many stupid people? Well, it's because of a refusal to use it. I regard it as the same as intelligence. If you refuse to use it, then you know you are worse off, right? Blah, blah. Some familiarity with Greek terminology is required if one hopes to capture the nuances in his thought. Yeah, well, I would suggest that we dig into Greek culture also, and the values that they had, and be able to understand, in order to be able to understand Aristotle better. Unfortunately, my knowledge of the Greek culture is very, very limited. Classicists and scholars do argue, of course, about the precise Greek meaning of key words or phrases, but many of these debates involve minor points of interpretation that can not concern us here. Aristotle's logical vocabulary needs to be understood within the larger context of his system as a whole. What system as a whole is he talking about? Many good translations of Aristotle are available. Brackets open, I'll just skip that. Ancient commentators regarded logic as a widely applicable instrument or method for careful thinking. See? They grouped Aristotle's 6 logical treatises into a sort of manual they called the organon, which is Greek for tool. The organon included the categories, on interpretation, the prior analytics, the posterior analytics, the topics, and on sophisticated refutations. These books touch on many issues: the logical structure of propositions, the proper structure of arguments, syllogisms, the difference between induction and deduction, the nature of scientific knowledge, basic fallacies, debating techniques, and so on. But we cannot confine our present investigation to the organon. Aristotle comments on the principle of non-contradiction in the metaphysics, on less rigorous forms of argument in the rhetoric, on the intellectual virtues in the Nicomachean ethics, on the difference between truth and falsity on the soul, and so on. We cannot overlook such important passages if we wish to gain an adequate understanding of Aristotelian logic. All right. The world, as Aristotle describes it in his categories, is composed of substance, separate individual things, to which various characterizations or properties can be ascribed. Each substance is a unified whole composed of interlocking parts. There are two kinds of substances. A primary substance is, in the simplest instance, an independent or detachable object composed of matter, characterized by form. Individual living organisms, a man, a rainbow trout, an oak tree, provide the most unambiguous examples of primary substances. Sounds like I don't have a clue what he means with primary substances. So individual living organisms, a man for instance, provide the most unambiguous examples of primary substances. Why? It's, probably just the way that the information has come to me during my lifetime, but primary substances, this makes me think of like atoms, for instance, right? Not that he had a clue about the existence of them. Alright, maybe we'll get it after reading secondary substances. These are the larger groups, the species or genera, to which these individual organisms belong. So man, horse, mammals, animals would be example of secondary substances. As we shall see, Aristotle's logic is about correctly attributing specific properties to secondary substances, and therefore indirectly about attributing these properties to primary substances or individual things. Alright, so primary substances, as I can see here, when he says, for instance, tree or man, these are limited by a border, right? Like the skin, if you're talking about a man. When they're talking about secondary substances, they're talking about man as a class. They're talking about animals, right? But then why is a horse here in there? Because a horse is part of animals. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Secondary substances are the larger group, the species or genera, right? Those things, those two should be further investigated. We'll do that shortly. to which the individual organisms belong, right? Individual organisms belong there. So man, and I was thinking here that he meant mens in Dutch. And then it says horse, which is pretty much an example of one animal. And then mammals, which is tied to man. And then animals, and then they all belong to the secondary substances. So what's the difference then between horse and animals? I see a definite difference there. So let's copy this, species or genera. Copy that. If I remember correct, Gino Denning has taught us about this before, but I just don't remember. Let's see what we get. Species or genera. Species and genus, right? Let's see, yes. I think this is good. Copy this. Copy that. Come on. My mouse isn't working properly. Alright. There. Secondary substances are the larger groups, the species or genera. Alright, so what is genera? It's genus. Genera redirects here. Right? A genus is a taxonomic rank used in biological structure of living and fossil organisms in biology. In the hierarchy of biological classification, genus comes above species. See, genus comes above species. Right, so I would say then species is human, for instance. And genus is higher than that. No, there's a lot that's higher than that. If you click the link on, I think Dan also has it. Yeah. All right, so this graph goes from species to genus to family to order to class to phylum, whatever that is, to kingdom to domain to life. The hierarchy of biological classifications, 8 major taxonomic ranks. Right? So, taxonomic rank starts at the bottom. Species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. Yeah. This graph shows the taxonomic ranks, domain, and so on. Here it demonstrates how taxonomic ranking is used to classify animals and earlier life forms related in the red fox, in this case. Alright, so what's this to do with Aristotle, right? Hold on, let me click chat back here. So these are, according to Aristotle, the substances. Yeah. Substantie, it would be a Dutch word for that. The only thing that comes to my mind is something that exists, a substance. It's there. Yeah. As we shall see, Aristotle's logic is about correctly attributing specific properties to secondary substances, and therefore indirectly about attributing these properties to primary substances or individual things. And this is about properties, and there's a funny thing about properties. And maybe I should just Google that and see what I get, right? It's a term called emerging properties. Emerging properties. What do we get? Emergence. There's a wiki link. That's not what I was looking for. This one then. This is just a website where everybody can answer. What is your definition of emergent? I'll get this fracking pop-up. What is your definition of emergent properties or emerging properties? The answer here. An emergent property is a property which is a collection or complex system, which a collection or complex system has, but which the individual members do not have. A failure to realize that a property is emergent or supervenient leads to the fallacy of division. Alright, so I was thinking about this idea of emerging properties, and what came to my mind was there's this thing about water, for instance. And basic chemistry, they should tell you water is H2O, right? However, one H2O does not have the properties of water. It's only when you put together 6 of them, then you get the smallest possible drop, which actually does have the properties of water, naming fluidity, for instance. Right, so that is then an emerging property of H2O, right? And also, they tried to pressurize water, and normally it is said that you can't make a dent. I don't know how else to explain it. Make a dent in a fluid, and that's why all oil pressure works for your brakes, for instance. But you can make a dent in solid, which is it's kind of strange. And so they put a lot of pressure on this tiny bit of water, and at a certain level of pressure, it seems to begin to manifest properties of steel. So that's very odd, isn't it? Unfortunately, they were not able to test if it was conductive due to the small space that was left between the things giving the pressure and a little bit of water. So that could also be an emerging property. Yeah, that's what I should have said. You cannot compress a fluid, right? That's the usual rule. Which is very useful, by the way. So your brakes work. As part of it anyway. What else is here? In chemistry, for example, the taste of saltiness is a property of salt, but that does not mean that it is also a property of sodium and chlorine. Right? That I would not call an emerging property. Now that's logical. If you combine two different elements, that you would get a different result. You know, you don't expect this combining of these two elements to have the properties of those two elements, chemically speaking. You don't expect that. And I wouldn't call that an emerging property. And then here's another one. In biology, it says, for example, heart is made of heart cells. Heart cells on their own do not have the property of pumping blood. You will need the whole heart to be able to pump blood. Right? I wouldn't call that a emerging property either. It's the way it's constructed. This has nothing to do with an individual heart cell. No. So this is a difficult topic for me anyway. Here's one that uses term consciousness. I met the notion in relatio to the appearance of life and consciousness. Those who use this term think that neither life nor consciousness is an independent substance, but they cannot be simply reduced to the level below. Right, this is an interesting topic, argument. I've said this also in the past. You can't. They can do a lot of with like GMOs, right? They know how to influence stuff, but they can't make life and they can't make consciousness. And so the idea, what I think, is that the scientists trying to explain what is consciousness might think of it as an emerging property, right? There's a saying, right? More than the property, more than the sum of the, what is it? Yeah. Let's see. Where were we? Here. Aristotle elaborates a logic that is designed to describe what exists in the world. Yeah, I would again say this differently. Logic is a part of your mind, I would say, I think. This is just my opinion, right? I would say that logic is part of your mind. And your mind is specifically equipped to figure out the input that you get. And so what exists in the world? He says it's designed to describe what exists in the world. Well, yeah. I would say that's a necessary thing. It's you need it to survive in this world, to be able to walk, so that you don't bump into trees and stuff. Okay, that's about all. We may well wonder then how many different ways we can describe something. In his categories, Aristotle enumerates 10 different ways of describing something. This categories is from Greek kategoria, deriving from the verb to indicate, signify. Right, so there's 10 of them. One is substance, then quantity, then quality, then relation, then where, then when, then being in a position, which is a rather typical philosophical topic, being in a position. 8, possessing. 9, doing. Or 10, undergoing something or being affected by something. So those are 10 categories, apparently, in which you can describe something. In the topics, he includes the same list, replacing substance with essence. We can, along with Aristotle, give an example of each kind of description. Right, so he replaces substance with essence. That's interesting. Essence means most important. The essence of a story, for instance. What's the most important thing of the story? What's essential? Right? What must be? Goes a bit more back to the idea of a basic element of which everything is made. It's the ancient idea in Greek philosophy. We can, along with Aristotle, give an example of each kind of description. 1. To designate something as a horse or a man is to identify it as a substance or to attribute it or to attribute an essence to it. 2. To say what the wall, to say that the wall is 4 feet long is to describe it in terms of quantity. So, continues, to say that the roof is white is to ascribe a quality. To say your weight is double mine is to describe a relation between the two. To say something happened in the marketplace is to explain where. To say it happened last year, explain when. To say an old man is sitting is to describe his position. To say the girl has shoes on is to describe what she possesses. To say the head chef is cutting a carrot with a knife is to describe what he is doing. And finally, to say wood is being burned in the fireplace is to describe what it means for wood to undergo burning or be affected by fire. Commentators claim that these 10 categories represent either different descriptions of being or different kinds of being. To be a substance is to be in a certain way. To possess quantity is to be in a certain way. To possess a quality is to be in a certain way, and so on. There is nothing magical about the number 10. Aristotle gave shorter lists elsewhere. Whether Aristotle intends the longer lists as a complete enumeration of all conceivable types of description is an open question. The descriptions are impossibilities, or probabilities, I should say, in quantum mechanics. I don't know if probabilities fits in any of those. Don't know if you even could call it a form of being. Scholars have noticed that the first category, substance or essence, seems to be fundamentally different than the others. It is what something is in the most complete and perfect way. Then we are at 3, from words into propositions. Aristotle does not believe that all reasoning deals with words. Moral decision-making is, for Aristotle, a form of reasoning that can occur without words. Still, words are a good place to begin our study of his logic. Logic, as we now understand it, chiefly has to do with how we evaluate arguments. But arguments are made of statements, which are, in turn, made of words. In Aristotelian logic, the most basic statement is a proposition, a complete sentence that asserts something. There are other kinds of sentences, prayers, questions, commands, that do not assert anything true or false about the world and which therefore exist outside the purview of logic. A proposition is ideally composed of at least 3 words: a subject, a word naming a substance, a predicate, a word naming a property, and a connection verb. Usually that's is. If I remember correct from previous things we did on logic, is being, or that did that come into our grammar and our study of grammar, is as a connection word. What logicians call a copula, Latin for bond or connection. Think of couple. Consider the simple statement Socrates is wise. Socrates is a subject, the property of being wise is the predicate. And the verb is the copula, links Socrates and wisdom together in a single affirmation. We can express all this symbolically as S is P, where S stands for Socrates and P stands for the predicate being wise. Alright, so if you want to check if what somebody is saying, somebody brings you an argument, right? And you want to check if what they are saying, it has the valid form of an argument to begin with. Has the valid form, right? Yeah. You need to learn to break down what he says and break it down into these formula, like S is P, right? So the important thing here is that the different letters are usually not that hard to figure out which words of the argument can be reduced to letters. What is more difficult is being able to put a form of the word to be in between them. As long as you can do that, then you have it in a form that you can use, like S is P, or some S are P, or no S are P, for instance. We will get to that later. So the important thing is that if you want to decide if somebody's argument is valid, you need to check the form of the argument first. And you can get to the form of the argument by replacing letters with the most important words that were used in presenting this argument, and then combine them with the form of to be. We can express all this symbolically as S is P, where S stands for Socrates and P stands for the predicate being wise. The sentence Socrates is wise, or symbolically S is P, qualifies as a proposition. It is a statement that claims that something is true about the world. Paradigmatically, whatever that is, the subject would be a secondary substance, a natural division of primary substances. What the heck is that? The subject would be a substance, and the predicate would be a necessary or essential property, as in birds are feathered, or triangles have interior angles equal to 2 right angles, or fire is upward moving. But any overly restrictive metaphysical idea about what terms in a proposition mean seems to unnecessarily restrict intelligent discourse. Suppose someone were to claim that anger is unethical, but anger is not a substance. It is a property of a substance, an organism. Still, it makes perfect sense to predicate properties of anger. We can say that anger is unethical, hard to control, an excess of passion, familiar enough, and so on. Aristotle himself exhibits some flexibility here. Still, there is something to Aristotle's view that the closer a proposition is to the metaphysical structure of the world, the more it counts as knowledge. Aristotle has an all-embracing view on logic and yet believes that what we could call metaphysical correctness produces a more rigorous scientific form of logical expression. Alright, so it says here, anger is unethical. Right? What do you guys think about that statement? Anger is unethical. I'm just wondering what you guys think about that in the chat room if you want to comment. Hold on. One sec. Of course, it is not enough to produce propositions. What we are after is true propositions. Aristotle believes that the only propositions are true or false. Truth or falsity, at least with respect to linguistic expressions, is a matter of combining words into complete propositions that purport to assert something about the world. Blah, blah. I would agree, Grim. Those two, you can't put the two together in one sentence. Anger is an emotion. And it has nothing to do with ethics. Ethics has to do with actions. If you are angry and actually act on your anger, for instance, and you commit a murder, then the murder is unethical, not the anger. All right. Where were we? Thank you, Grim. Individual words or incomplete phrases considered by themselves are neither true or false. To say Socrates, or jumping up and down, or brilliant red, is not to assert anything true or false about the world. It is to repeat words without making any claim about the way things are. In the metaphysics, Aristotle provides his own definition of true and false. Alright, so it says here, to say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not, is true. And to say of what is that it is not, or of what it is not that it is false. Alright, so this seems a bit like circular reasoning to me, to be honest with you. Or it's hard to understand what he means if you don't know what they understood with the word is. Right? In the philosophy that I have been indoctrinated in, the word is, as being linked to be, has very much to do with truth. Right? He's making a definition of true and false, right? And so truth has to do with being, because you can only say something true about something that's actually in existence. Right? And so false, in the way I use the word truth, philosophically speaking, is hard to talk about, because you would be talking about something that is not. And that you can't say anything about something that is not. So false is a pretty difficult word here. They talk about this in the ancient Indian philosophies also. And they make even stranger contradictions about the nature of the absolute truth, as it being and not being at the same time. This is very confusing and leads to all kinds of contradictions. Even Zeno, used his axe and said, listen, there's only to be. That's the only thing that we can say something about. The other two are, and I would even agree with him, useless to talk about. You can't talk about something that is not, and to talk about something that is and is not at the same time is contradictory. It leads to confusion. Alright, but Aristotle is not proposing a correspondence theory of truth as an expert would understand it. Right? So to me, truth has everything to do with reality. I don't see the difference between the two. Things that exist. He is operating at a more basic level. Consider the statement, spiders have 8 legs. Symbolically, all S is P. Yeah? Spiders have 8 legs. Symbolically, all S is P. So how did they go from have to is, right? It says spiders have 8 legs. Or you can say spiders are 8-legged beings. See? It's the same things. So that's how you get all S is P. Whereas the subject is spiders. P, the predicate, is the state of being 8-legged. 8-legged. And the verb is functions as the copula, the coupler. What does it mean to say that this claim is true? What kind of question is that? What does it mean to say that this claim is true? If we observe spiders to discover how many legs they have, we will find that, except in a few odd cases, spiders do have 8 legs. So the proposition will be true because what it says matches reality. Yeah. Is that the answer to the question? What does it mean to say that this claim is true? I mean, that seemed too obvious to me, sorry. As we shall see, Aristotle's logic is designed to produce just this kind of general statement. Which brings us to kinds of propositions. Aristotle suggests that a proposition must either affirm or deny something. Either proposition must be either in affirmation or negative. It cannot be both. He also points out that propositions can make claims about what necessarily is the case, about what possibly is the case, or even about what is impossible. His model logic, which deals with these further qualifications about possibility or necessity, presents difficulties of interpretation. We will focus on his assertoric, that's non-model, whatever that is. Assertoric logic, that's what we will be focusing on apparently. Still, many of Aristotle's points about necessity and possibility seem highly intuitive. In one famous example about a hypothetical sea battle, he observes that necessary truth or a mere proposition does not trump the uncertainty of future events. Because it is necessarily true that there will be or will not be a sea battle tomorrow, we can conclude that either alternative is necessarily true. Alright, so this is confusing to me. It says here, because it is necessarily true that there will be or will not be a sea battle tomorrow, we cannot conclude that either alternative is necessarily true. No, you can't. Alright, so I don't get why this is being brought up. It's probably because of my refusal to accept the future as something existing. So the necessity that attaches to the proposition there will or will not be a sea battle tomorrow does not transfer over the claim that there will be a sea battle tomorrow, or the claim there will not be a sea battle tomorrow. Yeah. I would say both of those claims are questionable. Aristotle goes out of his way to emphasize the point that our personal beliefs about what will happen in the future do not determine whether the individual propositions are true. Yeah. Note that we must not confuse the necessity, not the necessity, we should not confuse the necessary truth of a proposition with the necessity that precipitates the conclusion of a deductively valid argument. The former is sometimes called material, non-logical, or metaphysical necessity, the latter formal, deductive, or logical necessity. Alright, this will get discussed later, below. Hold on guys, I need to light my cigarette here. Aristotle claims that all propositions can be expressed using the subject copula predicate, all SRP, formula, and that complex propositions are, on closer inspection, collections of simpler claims that display in turn this fundamental structure. Having fixed the proper logical form of a proposition, he goes on to classify different kinds of proposition. He begins to distinguish between particular term and universal term. Alright, so particular term, universal term. The term he uses for universal is the Greek katolou, something like that. Sounds like category, catalogus. The term he uses for universal is the Greek katolou. Particular terms refer to individual things. Universal terms refer to groups of things. The name Socrates is a particular term because it refers to a single human being. The word spiders is a universal term, for it universally applies to all members of the group spiders. Aristotle realizes, of course, that universal terms may be used to refer to parts of a group as well to entire groups. We may claim that all spiders have 8 legs, or that only some spiders have book lungs, whatever that is. In the first case, a property, 8-leggedness, is predicated on an entire group referred to by the universal term. In the second case, the property of having book lungs is predicated on only part of the group. So, to use Aristotelian language, one may predicate a property universally or not universally of the group referred to by a universal term. This brings us to Aristotle's classification of the 4 different kinds of categorical propositions, called categorical propositions because they assert a relationship between 2 categories or kinds. Each different categorical proposition possesses quantity insomuch as it represents a universal or a particular predication, referring to all or only some members of the subject class. It also possesses a definite quality, positive or negative, insomuch as it affirms or denies the specified predication. The adjective all, no, and some, which is understood as meaning at least one. Some is at least one. Determine the quantity of the proposition. The quality is determined by whether the verb is in the affirmative or negative. Rather than going into the details of Aristotle's original text, suffice it to say contemporary logicians generally distinguish between 4 logical possibilities. There we go. 1 is universal affirmation. All SRP. 2 is universal negation. No SRP. And then is particular affirmation, some SRP, and particular negation, some S are not P. Note that these 4 possibilities are not, every instance, mutually exclusive. As mentioned above, particular statements using the modifier some refer to at least one member of a group. To say that some S are P is to say that at least one S is P. To say that some S are not P is to say that at least one S is not P. It must follow then, at least on Aristotle's system, that universal statements require the corresponding particular statement. If all S are P, at least one S must be P. Excuse me? I would say no, all S. It says here, if all S are P, at least one S must be P. That is, the particular statement, some S are P, must be true. Well, of course, if you well, actually, no. If you say all S are P, then the statement some S are P is inadequate. Right? And of course, if you say that all S are P and you take some S out of those, then you will find that they are P. But what the heck? I would just say that some SRP is less accurate than all SRP. You know more about S if you say all SRP than if you say some SRP. Again, if no SRP, at least one S must not be P. That is, in the particular statement, some S are not P must be true. More on this with qualifications below. Note also that Aristotle treats propositions with an individual subject, such as Socrates is wise, as universal propositions, as if the proposition was saying something like, all instances of Socrates are wise. One caveat, although we cannot linger on further complications here, keep in mind that this is not the only way to divide up logical possibility. Now comes the difficult one. I'll paste a link in the chat in case anybody wants to tag along. This is at 5. Let's see. Square of opposition. It's about 1/4 down from the top. And this helps you to validate arguments. I think it's pretty complicated, actually. There, you see a square there with a cross in it, and some lines are valid and others are not. Like, for instance, we know contradictions are not valid. Contradiction means either both are false or one of them is false. Aristotle examines the way in which these 4 different categorical propositions are related to one another. His views have come down to us as the square of opposition. A memoric diagram that captures, systemizes, and slightly extends what Aristotle says in the Interpretatione. And then you get this figure, which is a square with a cross in it. On the top left is all SRP, bottom left some ARP, top right no SRP, bottom right some S are not P. Alright, I don't understand why at the bottom left it says some ARP. Why doesn't it say some S? This is very confusing. And they all have letters. Top left A, top right E, bottom left I, bottom right O, and then the lines between A and E is contrary. The line between A and I is subalternates, whatever that is. Then I to O is subcontraries, never heard of those, and never heard of O to E subalternates. That's the same as I to A. And in the middle there's contradictions. Now, what do we do with this traditional square of opposition? As it turns out, we can use a square with crossed interior diagonals to identify 4 kinds of relationships that hold between different pairs of categorical proposition. Consider each relationship in turn. Contradictory propositions possess opposite truth values. In the diagram, they are linked by a diagonal line. If one of 2 contradictories is true, the other must be false, and vice versa. No, this is not correct. In contradictories, it can be that both statements are false. There's a difference between a contradiction and a contrary. I hope he's going to give the right one for contrary, right? Because that's where it is. That if one is true, that the other must be false. And if one is false, the other must be true. This is contraries, not contradictions. Anyway, I'll continue. So the A proposition, all S are P, and the O proposition, some S are not P, are contradictions. Yes. Clearly, if it is true that all S are P, then O statement, some S are P, must be false. This sounds more like a, what do you call that? Don't remember. Paradox. And if it is true that some S are not P, then the A statement that all S are P must be false. The same relationship holds between E, no S are P, and I, some S are P propositions. To use a simple example, if it is true that all birds lay eggs, then it must be false that some birds do not lay eggs. And if it is true that some birds do not fly, then it must be false that all birds fly. Next is contrary, so we'll get to contrary next. Grimmer says he thinks they call that a logical fallacy. Logical fallacy is a error in argument. Yeah. Contrary propositions cannot both be true. The top horizontal line is a square joining the A proposition all SRP and the E proposition no SRP. Represent this logical relationship. Clearly it cannot be true that all SRP and that no SRP. The truth of one of these contrary propositions excludes the truth of the other. It is possible, however, that both statements are false, as in the case where some S are P and some other S are not P. So, for example, the statement, all politicians tell lies and no politicians tell lies cannot be both true. They will, however, both be false if it is indeed the case that some politicians tell lies, whereas some do not. Alright, so this is not how I learned it from my teachers. A contrary, for instance, and I've explained this before, but the cat is dead and the cat is alive. Right? That's a contrary. The cat is either dead or alive. If it is not dead, then it means that it is alive. And if it is alive, then it means that it is not dead. Right? That's a contrary, because you can validate the position, is the best word I can come up with at the moment, the word position. You can validate the position of the other by checking the one. If you say before the one is the cat is dead, if you check that and it turns out that the cat is not dead, then it must be true that the cat is alive. Right? That's a contrary. This is how I was taught. This is not what this says. Let's continue. 3. The relationship of subalternation results when the truth of a universal proposition, the subaltern, requires the truth of a second particular proposition, the subaltern. So why did they not give that another name? The vertical lines moving downward from the top of the bottom of the square in the diagram represent this condition. Clearly, if all members of an existent group possess, or do not possess, a specific characteristic, it must follow that any smaller subset of that group must possess or not possess that specific characteristic. What does it say here? Clearly, if all members of an existing group possess or do not possess a specific characteristic, it must follow that any smaller subset of that group must possess or not possess that specific characteristics. Not sure how to grasp this. If the A proposition, all S or P, is true, it must follow that the I proposition, some S or P, must be true. Okay? Again, if the E proposition, no S or P, is true, it must follow that the O proposition, some S or not P, must be true. Yeah. Consider, for example, the statement, all cheetahs are fast. If every member of the whole group of cheetahs is fast, then it must be the case that at least one member of the group of cheetahs is fast. That is, the statement, some cheetahs are fast, must be true. Yeah, we discussed this now 5 times. Why go over it like that many times? And to reformulate the same example as a negation, we won't do that. Note, the subalternation does not work in the opposite direction. If some SRP, it need not follow that all SRP. Right? So, that's the difference between what I just explained. If you can, in the previous, the contrary, if you knew something about P, then it must follow something about S. Here that is not the case, right? If some S are not P, it need not follow that no S are P. We should also point out that if the subaltern is false, it must follow that the subaltern is false. So why again don't they use 2 different words here? Schrödinger's cat, yeah. Yeah. During the time in which you do not know the condition of the cat, it can be argued for it being dead and alive at the same time. However, if Schrödinger's experiment is carried out as described, the longer the cat is in the box, the more you can argue for it being dead. Yeah. Yeah, Schrödinger's cat. For our sub-contrary proposition cannot both be false. The bottom horizontal line in the square joining the I proposition, some S are P, to the O proposition, some S are not P, represent this kind of sub-contrary relationship. So some S are P and some S are not P. Alright, that's possible. Keeping to the assumption implicit in Aristotle's system, there are only 3 possibilities. 1. All S have property P, in which case it must also be true by subalternation that some S are P. 2. No S have property P, in which case it must also be true by subalternation that some S are not P. Then 3, some S have and some S do not have property P, in which case it will be true that some S are P and that some S are not P. Yeah. It follows that at least one of a pair of sub-contrary propositions must be true and that both will be true in cases where P is partially predicated of S. So for example, both members of the sub-contrary pair, some men have beards and some men do not have beards, are true. They are both true because having a beard is a contingent and variable male attribute. In contrast, only one member of the sub-contrary pair, some snakes are legless and some snakes are not legless, is true. All snakes are legless. The proposition some snakes are not legless must be false. Yeah, they are putting these words into place for letters when they say some snakes are not legless. Right? When you know that all snakes are legless, right? It's just a reminder that you must make sure your propositions are correct or are based in reality. Traditional logicians, inspired by Aristotle's wide-ranging comments, identified a series of immediate inferences as a way of deriving new propositions through a routine of rearrangement of terms. Subalternation is an obvious example of immediate inference. From all SRP, we can immediately infer, that is, without argument, that some SRP. They also recognized conversion, obversion, and contraposition as immediate inferences. Alright, we'll get an explanation of what that is. Conversion, obversion, and contraposition. In conversion, one interchanges the S and P terms. If, for example, we know that no S is P, we can immediately infer that no P is S. Okay. If you say no S is P, you can say no P is S. I would agree with that. Once we know that no circles are triangles, we know right away that no triangles are circles. In obversion, one negates the predicate term while replacing it with predicate terms of opposite quality. If, for example, we know that some S are P, we can immediately infer the obverse that some S are not P or non-P. Blah blah. Some. Yeah, I would guess I would agree with that. Some SRP, some idiots are blue hat wearing people. And then some S are not P, some idiots are not blue hat wearing people. I guess that would go. What does he say here? Once we know that some students are happy, we know right away that some students are not unhappy. Then, as last, contraposition, one negates both terms and reverses their order. If, for example, we know that all S are P, we can infer contrapositive, all non-P are non-S. Once we know that all voters are adults, we know right away that all children are unable to vote. Blah, blah. All children are non-voters. All adults are voters. Wait a minute. It says here all SRP, right? We can infer in contraposition all non-P are non-S. So we have 4 here. An S and a P and a non-P and a non-S. So we should have 4 back, and we do not, actually. Because we only have voters, adults, children, and non-voters. Alright, non-voters is the 4th. Okay, agreed. 6. Laws of thought. During the 18th, 19th and early 20th century, scholars who saw themselves as carrying on the Aristotelian and medieval traditions in logic often pointed to the laws of thought as the basis of all logic. One still encounters this approach in textbooks accounts of informal logic. The usual list of logical laws, or logical first principles, include 3 axioms: the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle. Yeah. Some authors include a law of sufficient reason, that every event or claim must have a sufficient reason or explanation, and so forth. It would be a gross simplification to argue that these ideas derive exclusively from Aristotle, or to suggest, as some authors seem to imply, that he self-consciously presented a theory uniquely derived from these 3 laws. The idea is rather that Aristotle's theory presupposes these principles and or that he discusses or alludes to them somewhere in his work. Traditional logicians did not regard them as abstruse or esoteric doctrines, but as manifestly obvious principles that require assent for logical discourse to be possible. The law of identity could be summarized as the patently unremarkable but seemingly inescapable notion that things must be, of course, identical with themselves. Expressed symbolically, A is A, where A is an individual, a species, or a genus, although Aristotle never explicitly enunciates this law. He does observe in the metaphysics that the fact that a thing is itself is the only answer to all such questions as why the man is man or the musician musical. This suggests that he does accept, unsurprisingly, the perfectly obvious idea that things are themselves. It's a strange Dutch word that comes to mind, hetzelfde. Same would be a translation back to English. Themselves, zichzelf. Zichzelf, that is a better translation than hetzelfde, but hetzelfde is an interesting word. Zichzelf, as a translation from themselves to Dutch, is also interesting because zich and zelf are two words, right? Zichzelf is translated from English to Dutch, but they both actually can come down to the same thing. Zichzelf, right? So them and selves can both come down to the same thing. Self is a pretty difficult word. It has vague origins, and it's also very hard to talk about self. The perfect obvious idea that things are themselves, right? But what is self? I think in psychology it is noted that the self doesn't exist. It's just an idea that you have. They call it false ego. Right? Another people might say, well, self, that's your soul. That's who you are. Right? But then again, if you ask them to give you a bit of evidence for the existence of soul, it gets pretty tough. Right? So the word self is pretty tough to use. If, however, identical things must possess identical attributes, and this is easier to talk about, things and attributes, right? Pretty graspable. This opens the door to various logical maneuvers. One can, for example, substitute equivalent terms for one another and, even more potential, something like that, one can arrive at some conception of analogy and induction. Aristotle writes, all water is said to be ... the same as all water ... because of certain likeness. What kind of nonsense is this? If, continues, if water is water, then by law of identity, anything we discover to be water must possess the same water properties. I don't see why at the beginning you should say, if water is water. That's... I think it's easier explained to say that a substance like water is something, and that it can have different properties. And if you call something water, it is because it has these properties. It is what it is, some would say. Aristotle provides several formulations of the law of non-contradiction, the idea that logically correct propositions cannot affirm and deny the same thing. It says here, Aristotle quote apparently, "It is impossible for anyone to believe the same thing to be and not to be." Yeah. Simple, right? The same attribute cannot at the same time belong and not belong to the same subject in the same respect. Simple enough. The most indisputable of all beliefs is that contradictory statements are not at the same time true. What is that? The most indisputable of all beliefs is that contrary statements are not at the same time true. Right, so there were three things, right? The law of identity, and the law of excluded middle, and another one. And I think this last one may have to do with the law of excluded middle. I hope we get there. Yeah, that's next. The law of excluded middle, this is a tough one, can be summarized as the idea that every proposition must be either true or false, not both and not neither. Excluded middle is the idea that every proposition must be either true or false, not both and not neither. In Aristotle's words, it is necessary for the affirmation or the negation to be true or false. Yeah. Symbolically, we can represent the law of excluded middle as an exclusive disjunction. A is true or A is false, where only one alternative holds. Because every proposition must be true or false, it does not follow, of course, that we can know if a particular proposition is true or false. Yeah, this seems a bit confusing, right? You can know that it's either true or false, but you don't know if it's true or if it's false. Despite perennial challenges to these so-called laws by intuitionists, dialethists or something, and others, Aristotelians inevitably claim that such counter-arguments hinge on some unresolved ambiguity, equivocation, on a conflation of what we know with what is actually the case, or a false or static account or identity, or on some other failure to fully grasp the implication of what one is saying. All right. Thanks, Captain Del, Dan, EDF, Grant, Jane, Joe, and 3 and all. Take care, everybody.
I think the New World Order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific